5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We are live. Coming to you live. Has it been live? Say what's up to the people, Dad.
Hey, welcome our wonderful audience. We're actually increasing our viewership. I think people are realizing how much we have to say about this pivotal moment when our democracy is hanging on the balance.
We just hit 170,000 subscribers.
Didn't you say we had increased by 7,500 since the election?
It's been a slow crawl, but it's been an upward crawl.
It's always better upward than downward, isn't it?
Well, some days we have lost subscribers, but for the last...
Look, nothing goes straight up or straight down, but the trajectory is in the right direction, and that's what counts.
The Tower of Terror goes straight up and straight down.
Oh, that's about it.
Right.
Now,
we
were going to talk about, we're going to talk about the polls, and we'll get to them.
We'll get to them.
And they're stunning.
But
that's not what's on my mind right now. Speaking of our democracy in peril.
Okay.
We have witnessed right before our eyes, and by the way, Trump says, don't believe what you see or hear, only believe what I tell you. Well, I think you should believe what you see right now. And it's a scene that you might expect in 1930s Italy or 1930s Germany or in China or in Russia or in another autocratic regime, North Korea. It's something you would never expect to see in American democracy. And quite frankly, I've studied our democracy from the founding to the present, and some pretty horrific things have happened. And but
get to the point.
One has to be hard-pressed to see what happened to a United States senator who did nothing more than try to ask a question at a press conference headed by Kristi Noem, the head of DHS, who said that habeas corpus means we can deport anyone we want. Of course you want to ask her questions.
Right.
But don't just listen to me. Watch this footage, and you'll be as shocked as I am.
Sir, hands up. I'm Senator Alex Padilla. I have questions for the secretary, because the fact of the matter is a half a dozen violent criminals that you're rotating on your
I also want to
hands up.
How many of our ICE agents have been docked?
Now, this is the worst part yet.
Hands behind your back.
Watch this.
Hands behind your back.
He's long out of the room. He obviously presents no danger, no threat to anyone. He hasn't committed any crimes, and yet there they are, 3 men and a fourth standing there, throwing this, I'm not sure how old he is, but he ain't a young guy, throwing him to the ground and handcuffing him. It's not as horrific, but it does bring back memories of what they did to George Floyd, right? When they threw him on the ground and kept their knee on him. You would never expect to see this in America. He identified himself as a United States Senator. He had a perfect right to be at a public meeting and to ask a question. And even if you thought, and I can't imagine how anyone who believes in our freedoms could have thought that he should have been forcibly removed from the room by who knows who they were, armed officers of some kind, several of them. There was absolutely zero justification for, once he's out of there, for throwing this guy on the ground, risking injury.
Not just a guy, a senator, a U.S. senator.
Who identified himself as the United States
Right, that's
senator.
Something that a lot of people have been calling out Kristi Noem for. She went on to Fox News and claimed that he never identified himself. And, it's pretty clear in this footage that he says his name pretty clearly. Whether she heard it or not.
Let's play that again.
Sir, hands up. I'm Senator Alex Padilla. I have questions for the secretary.
That was pretty clear.
There it is.
I am Senator Alex Padilla. I have questions.
Could not
pretty
be
clear.
But remember, this is a woman who claimed that habeas corpus means exactly the opposite of what it does. So
you
she
think,
has zero credibility.
You think she just didn't hear him? Or you think she's just actively lying about it?
I think she's actively lying. I give no credence to what she might say. You know, she has no credibility whatsoever. And then look at Mr. Smug, Mike Johnson. You know,
Screw that guy.
Oh, he is so smug. And behind that smug interior is a monster. And I use that word advisedly. What did he say should be done to Gavin Newsom if he couldn't arrest him?
Tarred and feathered.
Tar and feather him. This is a guy who claims to be guided by the teachings of Jesus. Is that something Jesus would say?
Give me a break.
Just the opposite. Turn the other cheek. Love your neighbor. Be kind. And tar and feathering is one of the most horrific punishments you can mete out to anyone. That's why for hundreds of years, civilized countries have banned it. If you survive it at all, you're going to live the rest of your life branded and in agony. Can you imagine advocating tar and feathering and then claiming to stand up for law and order and lying about the event, which everyone can see? He wasn't lunging at Kristi Noem. He wasn't posing any danger. He was very clear in saying, I'm a Senator Padilla, and I just want to ask her a question.
Yeah, I mean, she said he lunged at it. I mean, we only get the video from this vantage point, but it doesn't sort of look like he's lunging towards her or anything.
Yeah, and you got all these police officers or whoever they are. I think, since they don't identify themselves.
I think this guy who's grabbing him in the front is probably like a Secret Service guy.
Who knows?
This guy, I don't even know who this guy in the black suit is.
Yeah, they don't wear identification. We don't know who they are.
This guy, he's got an earpiece.
He may be Secret Service. Who knows? I'm not, you know.
I don't know who this guy is. I mean, I get none of them are marked with anything.
No. And when they grab people off the streets, they often wear masks.
Well, that's the ICE agents, yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, it's just reminiscent of the black shirts.
Here
and the
you can see a guy wearing an FBI vest. I don't know if you can see that.
Right, but that's not one of those who's... And now look at this, throwing him to the ground after he's out of the room, obviously poses no danger to anyone. He isn't armed.
These two guys must be Secret Service because
who knows?
They have earpieces, but they're not wearing any sort of...
Yeah, they may or may not be. And
this guy shows up. I don't know who this guy is. He's got some sort of
Yeah, we have no
badge.
idea.
Oh, he also says
One
FBI.
says FBI.
Yeah.
We don't know who the guy on the left is.
These two guys say FBI. I'm assuming this guy's Secret Service. I mean, he has a gun and an earpiece.
Maybe. I'm not disputed. And these are the same people who think this was an act of grave danger that required major military intervention, who thought that the January 6th insurrectionists, who are actually hurting and maiming 140 police officers, were just doing their patriotic duty.
These guys don't give a crap about law and order.
None. And they pardon them.
Police. Yeah.
They pardon the people who violently attacked police officers and yet claimed this guy should be manhandled, a U.S. senator who had done nothing wrong.
U.S. senator from the state of California. We're supposed to have co-equal branches of government. Why can't a senator who is supposed to be part of a co-equal branch have some say during a press conference from the federal government?
Of course he should have. Just like the congresswoman who was trying to inspect a federal facility. Representative MacGyver, right? An African-American woman who was just trying to do her lawful duty as a member of a co-equal branch of government and inspect a federal facility that was also under suspicion because it wasn't certain that they had their health and inspection certificates renewed. And are you telling me, we saw the footage of that too, that this woman, surrounded by these huge guys with guns, was posing some real danger to these forces. And now she's indicted on 3 counts.
What's her name? I'm going to try to look it up.
Representative MacIver.
How do you spell that?
MCIVER. Let's show her, this dangerous person.
Let's see if I can find it.
There she is. Yeah, really posed a grave danger to all of these big, burly, armed ICE officers, none of whom were injured in the slightest, unlike the 140 police officers injured in the January 6th insurrection. You know, they also arrested the mayor of New Jersey, of Newark, but they dropped those charges, realizing how flimsy they were. These charges are equally flimsy. You know, this is, again, reminiscent of using and abusing the legal system to hurt people and only intimidate them and advance your own political agenda. These are the kinds of things we never, ever should see in the United States. This is what you see in authoritarian regimes.
This is her in the red here. And
yeah, look at all these, police officers. She's really, posing a grave threat to them, isn't she?
It doesn't even look like she's moving.
She's not doing anything. And there's like 10 police officers around her.
I guess there she's trying to get in.
Just trying to get in.
Push her way in. That was a little incriminating, that shot of her trying to get in, maybe a little bit.
But she's had a right to get in.
Yeah.
That's the point. She wasn't posing a danger to anyone by trying to get in. Look at all those big, huge, armed officers around her. Are you telling me she was endangering them?
No, I don't believe.
If you believe that, guess what I've got to sell you?
No, I completely do not believe that she was presenting any type of danger to these folks. And like I said, she's part of a co-equal branch of government. Why?
Exactly. She had a right to be there, a right to go in. She was not trespassing.
She's a federal politician. This is
a federal office holder.
Right. This is a federal facility.
Look at all these big, huge guys around her. None of whom, were threatened in any significant or even minor way. Come on.
No, I agree with you.
There
was a moment there where she looked like maybe she was pushing a little bit.
The most minor way. She's being charged with crimes that could put her in prison for more than 10 years.
Right.
For that.
No, I agree. It's crazy.
January 6th insurrectionists who injured, maimed police officers, led directly or indirectly to some deaths. They're all heroes who should be pardoned.
I guess my point is she should have been allowed into the facility.
This should never have happened. Exactly. All they had to do was let her into the facility.
Right.
This should never have happened.
And they want to do this essentially because they want to stamp down dissent. That's the only reason they're doing all this, right?
We talked about that in the last show. And we quoted Pete Hegseth, who said, this is now part of Trump's approach, the use of the federal troops and the National Guard to keep the homeland safe, which is a blank check to use these federal forces, which only in the most dire of emergencies should ever be used for domestic law enforcement, for whatever purpose Trump wants, which could include patrolling polling places, even seizing voting machines on as thin a pretext as he has here for sending the Marines and the National Guards to Los Angeles.
I have breaking news into Lichtman Live, Dad. Israel has just launched strikes into Iran, according to CNN. This is literally breaking as we speak. It's on the CNN bulletin.
Wow.
Israel strikes against Iran. The strikes targeted Iran's nuclear program and its long-range missile capabilities, Israeli military officials say.
God, are we risking a wider war in the Middle East?
This has literally just happened, I think moments ago.
More militarism, more violence. And you know what this stems from?
What?
Trump abrogating...
You always know how to bring it back to Trump.
Of course, it's true.
Is it true? Okay.
It's true. I'm not doing this gratuitously.
Okay.
Trump abrogated the Iran nuclear accords. Remember that in his first term?
Yeah.
Which were working, even according to his own officials, to stop Iran from developing a nuclear weapon. Once you pulled out of those accords, there were no controls, and that's why Iran is coming close to building a nuclear weapon. And military action is not going to stop it.
So Rubio says there was no U.S. involvement in these strikes. Israel shifts into state of emergency, bracing for retaliation. Is this big news, Dad?
This is huge. This is amazing. And this is this horrific prime minister Netanyahu, who's made Israel an international pariah, who has committed horrific crimes in Gaza, who thinks the answer to anything is death and destruction. So I am by no means surprised by this.
This is not a one-day attack, Israeli source tells CNN. What is a war? Is a war breaking out right now, or am I overreacting?
I'm not a military strategist, but this is horrific. And as I said, it's the worst approach one could take. But it's Netanyahu's MO. What have they killed? 55,000 people in Gaza, most of them innocent.
We've got Mike Huckabee leading the charge.
Yeah.
God.
You know, these extreme right-wingers, you think they're going to Israel and supporting Israel because they love the Jews.
Right.
The opposite is true. They're supporting Israel, and you can check this out in my book, 2008 book, The Rise of the American Conservative Movement, thoroughly documented, because they believe that Israel is going to be the site of Armageddon. You know what Armageddon is, Sam?
Yeah, the rapture,
ultimate battle of good and evil. And guess what's going to happen to the Jews if they don't convert to Christianity?
They all die and go to hell, right?
They all die and go to hell. So much for these people loving the Jews. It's just horrific. Now, as I said, death, destruction. That seems to be the only answer Netanyahu has to anything. And it's just horrific that the head of a Jewish state should be doing such things. Now let's get to the polls. As promised.
That feels like pipsqueak news
I know,
right now.
but they're important.
Padilla and now a war breaking out in the Middle East. It feels like
God.
The polls. Oh, my God.
Well, we spent, the first 15 minutes plus on all this breaking news. But I've got to bring you these polls.
Yeah, bring it to them.
And remember, they were all taken before all these horrific things happened.
Right.
Right? Before the manhandling of Senator Padilla, obviously before this strike. And by the way, politically, who has benefited the most from this controversy in Los Angeles?
Newsom.
Gavin Newsom. It's made him a hero. It's catapulted him right to the top of the Democratic Party. All right, before we get to the polls, there's one other piece of breaking news.
What?
Who is the champion at stiffing people?
DJT.
Yes, he stiffs carpenters, painters, electricians, driven small business people out of business. He cheats the IRS, state and local governments where he holds rallies. And so far, guess who he's stiffing?
These folks.
These folks, the National Guard. They haven't been paid. And rather than make arrangements for humane and decent accommodations, these people who are following Trump's order are living in squalor, sleeping on the floor in these horrific makeshift locations that nobody but nobody should be forced to live in.
And this is from a tweet from Gavin Newsom. He said, "You sent your troops here without fuel, food, water, or a place to sleep. Here they are being forced to sleep on the floor, piled on top of one another. If anyone is treating our troops disrespectfully, it's you, at Real Donald Trump."
And Trump always has. He's called military people who have been captured suckers.
Right.
John McCain wasn't really a war hero. This is a guy who evaded the draft with bone spurs.
And we have to now deal with this military parade on his birthday.
On his birthday.
A man who never served is putting the military parade on his birthday.
And none of whose family has ever served.
Right.
Not his dad, not his sons, nobody.
Right.
And on top of that, they're talking about, oh my God, we got such a budget hole. We have to cut vital medical care for the most vulnerable Americans. But we can spend $45 million or more on a horrific parade, parading weapons of death and destruction. I've talked about this before. We shouldn't be celebrating death and destruction. We should have parades of doctors with stethoscopes or teachers with blue books and pencils, or nurses in their uniforms, social workers, people who do good, who are not dedicated. I'm not denigrating the military. We need a military, of course, but there are other things that we should be celebrating. $45 million plus on this vanity parade, not to mention whatever damage it may do to D.C., not to mention the cost of D.C. Security. What you got there?
With this $45 million one-day parade, you could pay the annual salary of 562 federal workers.
Wow. Unbelievable. And how much is this deployment, even with these National Guard troops sleeping on the floor? How much is that costing?
Right.
$134 million and probably rising. How many employees could you finance for 134 plus 45, $179 million?
Let's see, $179 million?
Yes.
Let me do the math real quick. $179 million. Let's say the average employee makes what, $70,000 a year?
We're not talking about, the
2,557 employees.
Unbelievable. And this doesn't even count the tens of $millions that's being spent on Trump's golf trips.
Well, let's not even go there.
Yeah, and where are they spending them? At his properties. So look at these polls before any of this was revealed. Let's start with these. This is the very respective Quinnipiac Poll, just released today. Remember the so-called Big Beautiful Bill?
Big Ugly Bill.
What did Elon Musk call it?
I don't remember.
Disgusting abomination bill. Well, most voters agree. Do you think they agree with Trump or Musk?
Trump.
Nope.
No, I mean Musk. I mean Musk.
According to the poll, 53% oppose the bill. Only 27% support it. That's double the number who support it, and 20% just don't know enough to offer an opinion. Only 67% of Republicans support the bill. Only 2% of Democrats. Only 20% of independents. 47% of voters think federal funding for Medicaid should increase. 40% say it shouldn't decrease, should stay the same. Only 10% think federal funding for Medicaid should decrease, one of the key elements of the bill. Even among Republicans, only 18% say that funding for Medicaid should decrease. Overall, get this, Sam.
Okay.
38% of voters approve the way Donald Trump is handling his job as president. 54% disapprove.
How does this guy win the election?
Because people got fooled, and I don't understand how they could have.
Right. Those numbers are so underwater. Doesn't make sense.
Historic low for this point in a presidency, by far. Historic low for this point in a presidency, by far. I'm just so amazed. And what's his big issue? Immigration?
Yeah.
43% approval, 54% disapprove.
Oh, my God.
Deportations, 40% approve, 56% disapprove. Trade, 38% approve, 57% disapprove. Universities, 37% approve, 57% disapproved. And this is true right down the line on every issue, including his signature issues. He's deeply underwater. And this is not an outlier poll. Another poll came out, the NORC poll, at the same time, and it had Trump's approval rating at 39%, 60% disapproving, a 21% gap, very similar to the Quinnipiac poll. So quite rightly, Trump is tanking. And this, you may think, is irrelevant, but it's important. Really, the only way you can effectively stop an authoritarian is by a popular uprising, is if he loses support in a big way among the people.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. Do you think this changes anything? Is his administration going to take this to heart and pivot on a few things?
I'm not sure his administration will take it to heart. I don't think they care. But members of Congress will. They want to get reelected.
Yeah. But especially Republicans, doesn't seem like they're ever going to try to combat Trump on anything.
Well, I've always said politics is like Wall Street. It runs on two things, fear and greed. And if they're fearful enough that they're going to lose their political power, that is the only way they are going to in any way stand up to Trump.
Yeah.
So far, we haven't seen it.
Right.
But it's very, very early, and elections are pretty far away.
And maybe because he's in his second term, they're a little bit less afraid of him. Possibly. I don't know. Because, they'll be up for re-election in the middle of his term.
Every member of Congress and a third of the Senate. And there are quite a few members of Congress in difficult swing districts who won very narrowly when Trump won in 2024 and really can't afford any erosion of Republican support in 2026. No, I don't think Trump cares about anything. I think nothing can move Trump. And I also, everyone talks about Biden's mental acuity. We've talked about this before. It manifests itself in different ways, but you can also see Trump has lost a lot of mental acuity with his rambling, crazy, nonsensical, non-grammatical rants. In fact, Trump's rants are so nonsensical. We just got something amazing released today. This was from a month ago, a little more maybe, a transcript of the hearing about the quote-unquote administrative error in deporting Abrego Garcia, Sam.
Yeah.
And, Trump was saying, I can bring him back anytime I want, right?
Right.
And, of course, the lawyers for Garcia brought that up, saying, hey, the president says he can bring him back. How can you tell us you can't bring him back? You know what the lawyers said?
Tell me.
You can't really listen to what Trump says. He doesn't speak with precision.
Oh, my God.
He doesn't necessarily speak for the administration. Have you ever heard lawyers for an administration ever admit that you can't take the president of the United States at his word because he doesn't speak accurately?
That's crazy, Dad.
His own lawyers, his own Justice Department. This isn't some Democratic critic.
You won't believe this. We have more breaking news tonight on Lichtman Live. This came across, 10 minutes ago?
And just like the attack on Iran, which is of monumental significance. Can you imagine another major war in the Middle East?
Well, this piece of breaking news says a federal judge says Trump unlawfully federalized members of the California National Guard. A federal judge ruled Thursday that President Trump unlawfully federalized thousands of members of California's National Guard and ordered the president to return control of the troops to the state. The ruling from senior U.S. District Judge Charles Breyer is a significant win for Gavin Newsom, who sued Trump and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth earlier this week, et cetera, et cetera. His actions were illegal, both exceeding the scope of his statutory authority and violating the 10th Amendment to the United States Constitution. He must therefore return control of the California National Guard to the governor of the state of California, the judge wrote in his 36-page ruling.
Wow, as you say, that could not be a bigger win for Newsom. Not only did the judge say that what Trump did was illegal, but he has to return control of the Guard to guess who? His mortal enemy, Governor Gavin Newsom. And by the way, a little refresher, do you remember what the 10th Amendment is, Sam?
No.
It is the last amendment of the Bill of Rights, which says all authority not explicitly granted to the federal government is reserved for the states.
Right.
And as we said, the only time that I know of that a president deployed the National Guard for domestic law enforcement without the consent of the governor was back in the civil rights era.
So it says that Breyer's ruling will come out on noon Friday, but the Justice Department has already filed a notice of appeal. So what's going to happen now is...
well, here's what's going to...
Sorry.
Here's what's going to happen. And again, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm just giving you my best opinion. It'll go to the Ninth Circuit, which is a pretty liberal circuit. And they're going to decide, first of all, whether to stay this order. In other words, right now, presuming he obeys the order, and we know
Right, that's my question, I guess. Is
a huge question when it comes to Trump. But presuming he obeys the order, he's got to follow what the judge says and return control of the guard to Governor Newsom. Let me finish.
Oh, sorry.
However, the Court of Appeals could stay the order and say he doesn't have to return it yet until we have a chance to rule on the substance of what the lower court has said. Eventually, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals will rule on the substance of the order, but the immediate question is whether they issue a stay or not.
Okay, so, this line that I highlighted is pretty clear, right?
No question. Look, as I said, we talked about this before. I said I'm not a lawyer. I do think what he did was of dubious legality, but I know it's without precedent.
Right.
This just has never happened, and very likely he's exceeded his authority because he didn't invoke the Insurrection Act, and any other provision requires coordination and consent of the governor, which he didn't get.
It just seems unlikely to me that tomorrow at noon, Trump is going to be like, here, Gavin Newsom, here is all the power. I will now fade into the background. That just seems pretty unlikely, right?
I would be shocked if Trump obeys this order if there is no stay.
Right.
Now, he may not overtly disobey the order, but you know how Trump operates.
Right.
How does he vitiate court orders? What does he do?
He twists them and turns them until he can sort of make sense of it from his perspective, basically.
Well, let's put it more directly. Deflect, delay, and obstruct. He'll just take so much time and so much delay and so much deflection to carry it out that, in effect, it won't be carried out.
Right.
We've seen this time and time again with Donald Trump.
Yes, we have. Well, pretty crazy evening we're having.
Wow.
Right now, huh?
I think this is the most extraordinary breaking news we've ever had right in the middle of Lichtman Live.
Seriously.
A possible beginning of a war.
Jesus.
A major court decision against perhaps the most dangerous Trump policy, his right to deploy the Guard and federal troops as he will.
Wow.
And then this afternoon, just before the show, the extraordinary manhandling of Senator Padilla. Padilla.
Yeah.
Got it.
Got it?
Got it.
Good. All right. Before we get to our question portion of the show, we've got almost 2,300 people watching, but only 700 likes. Make sure you like the stream. It's completely free, and it helps us out a lot. If you're not subscribed, please subscribe. Click that notification bell so you know we're live. Donations and memberships get priority on questions, and you want your question in line for this guy. Trust me. I get to ask him questions all day.
What about our contest?
Oh, and we're also, stay tuned for an upcoming contest. We are looking for the best messaging / slogan for Dems to use in the future. We will send a Google Sheet out for you to fill out. We'll pick a top 5. And then we were talking about, we'll pick the top 5, and then maybe we'll let the audience vote on the winner. And the winner will get a signed copy of his new book, Conservative at the Core, A New History of American Conservatism.
Yes. And in the distant future, that'll be worth a lot.
And it won't have these yellow parts.
No. These are the early galleys. This is not the final copy.
Page proof, right?
Yeah, it'll be out September 1.
All right, I'm just going to read you a sentence from this.
You just randomly picked a sentence?
Just opened it and I'm picking a sentence. 21st century conservatives raised another immigration threat narrative against Latinos and Muslims. The culprits had changed, but the charges had not.
Wow, that's pretty good sentence.
Good. I just opened that up.
That's really good. And you get the point. It used to be the Irish and the French and the Germans and the Jews.
Right.
Then it switches to the Latinos and the Muslims with the same claims. They're bringing violence and disease and undermining the country.
Right. All right.
Same stuff.
Our first question is from Vacuum Tubes for Hi-Fi, our good friend. They say, on the note of Donald Trump's popularity versus Maria Do you know how to say that?
Schicklgruber's. Talking about Hitler.
Son. Schicklgruber's son was popular with... Hitler.
Yeah,
Hitler was popular with the German population, at least in early years of the regime. DJT, not so much. Should this be a comfort to us?
Vacuum tubes always ask the smartest questions.
Wow.
I'm very impressed, whoever that is. Yes, it has to be of comfort to us. He does not seem to be able to move the American people the same way Hitler was able to move the German people. It's a complete myth that the German people only went along because they were being intimidated, forced, threatened. That's a small part of it. But in fact, the German people so sadly followed along and believed what Hitler was doing. There's some very good books about ordinary Germans and what they did during the Nazi era. And as I said, our best hope really is for the American people to turn dramatically against Trump. It may not influence him, but it should have an impact on members of the House and Senate, local offices, governors, and maybe even the courts.
One thing that's a little scary to me is that Hitler never won an election, right? He was appointed and then became a strong man.
Well, he won a plurality in a
right. That is true.
In a German election. So yeah, he was fairly popular.
Is it necessary to hold the actual agents themselves, not the department, accountable with civil action for carrying out illegal orders from their superiors, including the unlawful arrest of Alex Padilla?
Oh, boy, I'm not a lawyer. That's a very technical, legal question. But leaving aside the legal ins and outs of that, and this is really very much untested, I always believe in going after the leaders. Just like Merrick Garland's historic, tragic mistake, going after all the underlings and sitting for almost 2 years and doing nothing about the leaders. Going after the underlings did nothing, zero, to stop the threat to this country. So yes, I always believe in going after the leadership. It doesn't mean you don't hold the rank and file accountable, but that's vastly less important. And it doesn't seem to be a lesson that's sunk in enough. I can't repeat it too many times.
What actions can Senator Padilla use to arrest the goons who violated his First Amendment right? This is the only sensible next step.
Well, again, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know the ins and outs of the legalities. But again, I think it's not the goons who we need to worry about, although we do. It's those who direct the goons. It's those who are the leaders. Just like a drug cartel. You can take out, the street dealers, and that's not going to undermine the business. And obviously, Pam Bondi and Kash Patel, Bondi is the Attorney General, Kash Patel, astoundingly, guy who had an enemies list, is the head of the FBI, are not going to do anything about this. The only possibility, and I think it's remote, would be to file state charges.
This is from Sunlit Man 57. They say, in the pre-2016 era, would you have called the scandal key by now? Doesn't Bitcoin, the Qatari jet, and several other scandals touch the presidency?
I don't disagree with any of that, but I don't recall making calls on the keys within a few months of a presidential administration. But certainly the case is being made for turning the scandal key, but I don't need to do it this early.
75 House Dems, including, unfortunately, my own rep, just voted with the GOP on a resolution to express their thanks to ICE agents. Honestly, I'm angrier with them than I am with Republicans who voted for it, since I don't expect them to pull this crap, while I hold Dems to a higher standard. I'm far from the only one who thinks this way. Do you agree with that line of thinking?
Alex, I couldn't agree with you more. Remember, Sam, what's my one-sentence description of today's politics?
Democrats have no spine, Republicans have no principles.
Right. Here is a perfect example of the spineless Democrats. Just like we saw with Merrick Garland. Oh, my God, I might be criticized for being political if I go after the leaders of the January 6th insurrection. Oh, my God, we might be criticized if we don't stand with ICE. If we learned anything from the last couple of days, what did we learn about Governor Newsom and the value of what he did?
Tell me.
Standing up for what is right and lawful, and standing up to Trump is not only obviously the right thing to do, it is also the politically smart thing to do.
This is from CD. They say, but as a lame duck president who also thinks he won't need another election, how much does negative public opinion actually impact him?
It only impacts him in the sense that it would hit his ego. You know, he likes to think he was the greatest president since Abraham Lincoln, maybe even greater.
Come on.
Yes, he said that.
Oh, my God.
He has certainly said that. But he doesn't care about public opinion polls because he'll make it up. Oh, right. My standing is 70%, or after a debate where he got thrashed by Kamala Harris, 80% believe I won the debate. So he'll just make up numbers. But it certainly could impact his ego if he takes any of it seriously, and I'm not sure he does or even knows about it. But as I said, it could have a real impact on his supporters in Congress and in the states.
This is from Lieutenant Aldo Rain. Do you know what that reference is to?
I think I do. What is it, Sam?
It's Inglourious.
It's a movie, right?
It's Inglourious Bastards. Yeah. It's Brad Pitt.
The leader of the...
Yeah, Brad Pitt's character.
Brad Pitt, right? Yeah, I thought so.
Is it justified to violently resist ICE or police when they attempt to detain someone without a warrant? Similar to how many people today view resistance to the Gestapo in 1936 as morally right. Are we at that point today?
I think we're right at the brink of that point. I never advocate violence. I have talked about this on the previous show. I think this takes more courage than to resist violently, and that is to put your body in harm's way and dare these so-called federal officers to shoot you.
No, come on.
Yes. I'm not saying you should do that, but, you know, it may come to that.
Right. Professor, do you believe...
Remember, that's what Martin Luther King did, right? He went to Birmingham, and he knew Bull Connor, the horrific director of public safety in Birmingham, would violently attack his peaceful demonstrators, you know, harming them, intimidating them. And he knew that the American people would react negatively, that this horror would be beamed right into their homes. And this is how Gandhi worked for the liberation of India so successfully.
Gandhi?
Gandhi. What did I say?
I've never heard of Gandhi before. Let's see. The G7 leaders, Zelensky, PM Modi, and others will be meeting at the summit starting this weekend. What are you hoping might come out of this meeting, if anything?
Total support for Ukraine. You know, this is another big lie that Trump has perpetrated, along with some of the biggest lies in the history of the country, like Barack Obama was really born in Africa and not a legitimate president, or he really won the 2020 election. The big lie is that it was Ukraine, not Russia, responsible for the war. That would be like saying when you get mugged by someone who punches you in the face, it's your fault for having your face in the way. This was a sheer act of unprecedented or barely precedent aggression, with one sovereign nation trying to aggressively and militarily take over another. So I hope total support for Ukraine will come out of this meeting. There is a right and wrong here. This is not a matter of gray. This is black and white. Ukraine is defending its survival, its democracy. Russia is trying to aggressively and violently take over another country and advance Putin's dictatorial goal of recreating the Soviet empire.
It's unprecedented in Europe for the last, 70 years?
Yes, this is the worst war by far in Europe since World War II.
Are the minds of most MAGAs truly warped, or do they know what they're doing is wrong and doing it anyway?
I don't think they know what they're doing is wrong. I've written about this extensively in another one of my books. I got a book covered in all this stuff, 13 Cracks, Repairing American Democracy After Trump. And I was actually guided in this by your brilliant mom, Karen Strickler, an expert on the digital world, which I'm not. But what is happening in the digital world, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Sam, because you're much more expert, is people are being isolated in bubbles where the algorithms feed them what they want to hear and shield out any contrary ideas or information. Or even if contrary ideas and information seep through the bubble, they're not taken seriously. It's the deep state, it's the radicals, it's the commies, it's Biden. So I do think, unfortunately, we are divided into these separate impenetrable bubbles.
I think probably most MAGA folks right now just believe Trump's enforcing immigration law, and that's what should be done.
Yeah, but it's beyond that. Their beliefs are much deeper.
Sure.
You know, they really believe, a lot of them believe in a Christian nation.
A white Christian nation.
Of course, a white Christian nation. And it's not just a matter of enforcing immigration laws, but they believe immigrants, as Trump put it, which is, we talked about, you read that line, right? This goes all the way back to the Alien and Seditions Acts of 1798, that anyone who's not part of that pure pioneer stock is poisoning the blood of America, bringing death, disease, violence to our country. It's much deeper than enforcing the law.
It was interesting. I was watching a debate the other day, and this right-wing commentator, she literally just said it out loud. She was like, when they were talking about immigration and race in America, she just said, this country should be white, period.
Yeah.
It's kind of terrifying. They're not even afraid to hide it now.
The architect of Project 2025, or Russell Voigt, there was a secret who came out and said, I'm a white nationalist. Yes, I believe that. And now he has one of the most important jobs in government, head of the Office of Management and Budget, the OMB.
What has made America so strong for so long is its diversity. And that's not just racial diversity, it's religious diversity, racial diversity, thought diversity. All these things is what makes America a thought leader and an entertainment leader and a political, all those things.
You're so right. And I've talked about this before, that unfortunately, there are these two sides to our heritage. The one side is what you're talking about, the strength and tolerance and diversity of every kind. Then there's this other side, the side that gave us slavery, Jim Crow, this anti-immigration threat, that believes in kind of a unified, homogenous culture and is intolerant of those who don't look like them, love like them, think like them, or be of the same religion and race.
What do these white nationalists want? Do they want to turn America into these hyper-homogenous societies like South Korea and Japan? I mean, we're seeing those societies right now dealing with immense issues due to how blocked off they've been and due to how homogenous they've been. I mean, is that their poster child? Japan?
Their poster child is Hungary.
I guess. I don't know.
They invited Viktor... this bad shoulder.
Oh, no.
Viktor Orban, the dictator of Hungary, to be their guest of honor at the Conservative Political Action Committee conference.
It's not like Hungary is some, advanced society that is...
Right. Where would you rather live?
Yeah.
In Hungary or in the U.S. pre-Trump?
Yeah. Even Trump, I think I'd still choose U.S.
I'd still choose the U.S. even now, right?
And my question, too, is what is white even? I mean, like you said, 80 years ago, Italians weren't considered white.
Jews weren't considered
Jews
white.
weren't considered white. Irish people at one point weren't considered white. So what do they even mean when they want a white nation? That doesn't even make any sense.
Have you ever heard of something called the social construction of reality?
No.
It's a very potent sociological theory, which says that lots of concepts, including all the concepts related to race, are not, fixed, rigid things that exist objectively out there. They're not like chairs or tables or automobiles. They are concepts created by the human mind, often simply to serve their own interests. And race is, a primary component of that. There's no objective definition of race.
It's scary.
Is Aaron Judge white or black?
Right, that's what I'm saying is, they say they want a white nation.
Yeah, what does that mean?
What does that even mean? And, it's a genocidal thought process. It's like, okay, so then what do you do with all the Latinos who live here? What do you do with all the black people who live here? What do you do with all the Arabs that live here? And even if those people leave voluntarily, right, then are you going to
self-deport? That's their answer.
But then, like I said, so is Aaron Judge. Is he white or is he not white? Or Italians, do they start going backwards and start saying, well, Italians aren't really white? And
natives of East India,
right,
who are Caucasians,
right?
Lots of I've been to India. Lots of people of India are very light skinned.
Yeah, it's a genocidal thought pattern.
Yeah, and by the way, if you look at some of these right wingers from the South, they don't necessarily look so white because there's so much mixed African American, English settler mixing that went on during the slavery era.
You could argue that Latinos are much more indigenous to America than white people are, because most Latinos are at least somewhat mixed with Native Americans, indigenous folks.
White European settlers were the ultimate illegal immigrants.
Oh,
right?
Got them.
They came here, and through violence, through broken promises, broken treaties, through the spread, sometimes deliberate, of disease, simply seized and took over lands occupied by the indigenous peoples who are already living here. I've talked a lot about the mythology, the right-wing mythology of Project 1776 that Trump issued as the ultimate guide to teaching American history in his first term. And one of the first things they talk about is how the pioneers conquered this vast, untamed, unknown wilderness, as if nobody lived here. And it was just an empty land that the white settlers moved into.
Our next question is from Patrick Murray. They say,
a good buddy.
They say, what are your thoughts on David Hogg leaving the DNC?
I really don't have thoughts about that, to be honest with you. People come and go all the time. I've had a lot of admiration for David Hogg, a survivor of the Parkland shooting, who's been a very powerful advocate against gun violence. I don't know the ins and outs of what made him leave the DNC.
Yeah, I haven't followed this story closely.
I haven't
but
either.
I don't think it's as simple as people come in and out. I think there was some drama here for sure.
Oh, yeah. They come in and out usually because of something going on. I didn't mean they just willy-nilly come in and out. There was some drama, and I'm not sure what it was.
Right. Yeah, I'm not really sure either. Would you consider Pat Buchanan a paleo-conservative? What the hell does that mean? And how does that differ from mainstream conservatism today?
Yeah. Pat Buchanan was an important conservative figure of the late 20th century. I got to know him fairly well, even though we were absolutely on opposite sides of the political spectrum. We became friends, believe it or not.
I don't believe it.
It's hard to believe. We got along pretty well. I also got along with his sister, Bay Buchanan. And kind of paleo-conservative means a throwback to old-fashioned isolationist conservatism as opposed to neo-conservatism. Like George W. Bush,
right.
Kind of this belief that America should be active around the world promoting democracy and American values. And I would have to say, a lot of conservatives today are probably closer to Pat Buchanan than George W. Bush. Remember, George W. Bush also was a believer in immigration reform and a path to citizenship. And right. Pat Buchanan, like Donald Trump and his allies, was a important spokesperson in demonizing the dangers of immigration.
I thought it was a paleo-conservative was a Republican who only eats broccoli and beef.
That would be a much better approach.
James Lagruta says, what does Israel's attack on Iran mean for the global future?
I'm
Simple
always
question.
loath, to speculate, but I'm fearful. I'm hoping it does not lead to a wider war. But, the Middle East is the most unstable region of the world, and one has to really worry with such aggressive military action. That is the MO of Netanyahu. I don't believe it solves anything, and I think it poses grave dangers. If we only had stuck and not simply, for revenge against Obama, pulled out of the Iran nuclear accords, we wouldn't be in this conundrum today.
Trump is doing all of this to upset Democrats. That's it. He wants attention. Don't you think he is clearly defining just how inept the Republican Party is?
I don't disagree about the inept part, although I would stress the dangerous part. And he's obviously, of course, he loves provoking and upsetting Democrats, and he loves it. But there's much more to this, unfortunately. I wish it was only that. As I said, this all is pointing in the direction of Trump trying to clamp down authoritarian rule on our country to the benefit of himself and his wealthy friends and allies. I just cringe every time I hear someone or see someone in the media call Trump a populist. We've got over this so many times in the show.
We don't need to
He's the opposite of a populist. Right. The populists were against everything that Trump stands for.
What do you think of Zoran for the New York mayoral primary? Seems the direction Dems need to go rather than a corporate Dem like Cuomo.
Yeah, I haven't really followed the New York primary. I've been so disgusted with New York City politics recently that I've pretty much tuned out.
Why is Cuomo still around? I thought we got rid of that guy.
I thought we got rid of him.
Jeez.
Too. What was it? Friday the 13th. We made reference to that movie Jason.
Right.
Supposedly he drowned, and then all of a sudden he rises up.
Seriously.
Out of the muck. Well, these politicians. We thought we were done with Trump, right?
Well, yeah.
These politicians like Jason, like horrible specters rise up out of the muck.
Ugh, that's scary.
And I like his brother, by the way, a lot, though I'm no Andrew fan, Chris Cuomo.
This is from Kathy Lovins. They say, Professor, this crap puts our country at such risk to be attacked. What are your thoughts for World War III? I think we get a World War III question like once every 2 weeks.
I know. I don't think we're going to have World War III, although there are better authorities than myself on foreign affairs and military affairs who say we're closer to a nuclear confrontation than we have been in our recent history. I think it was the Union of Concerned Scientists that, have you heard of the Doomsday Clock, Sam?
Tell me.
It's the clock which shows how close we are to nuclear annihilation, and they've moved it very close to the witching hour, to the midnight hour.
That's terrifying.
It's quite terrifying. There's so much to be terrified about, but take solace in your personal life, in what you can do for your country, what you can do for yourself, your family, and your friends. You can't get too swallowed up in all of this.
What's the best movie, TV series, or book about a nuclear apocalypse?
The Day After. So it's very, very old, but it talks about the aftermath of a nuclear attack. On the Beach is a very chilling novel about apocalypse. And there are all the zombie movies too, which I haven't paid much attention to.
Zombie movies, that's not really a...
no, but The Day After and On the Beach.
Have you ever heard of Fallout? It's a video game that's about the aftermath of a big atomic war.
No.
Cool. Good talk.
How much time do we have?
1 minute.
All right, last question.
Last question. It's a strange one. What % believe DJT is all over the Epstein files?
I haven't seen polling on that, but I'm willing to bet a pretty hefty chunk of the American people believed DJT is all over the Epstein files. I mean, it doesn't mean he did anything wrong, but we do know that he was very friendly with Epstein. He praised him as a great guy. He said, Like himself, he likes women, and he likes them on the younger side.
Yikes.
We know that he logged in a number of times into Epstein's plane. I'm not saying he did anything wrong, but no question, he's got to be in the Epstein files. Not necessarily in an incriminating way, but at least in some way. Now, let's not forget, this is a guy who's bragged openly about grabbing women by their private parts just because he's a star. And by the way, there is a second part of that Hollywood Access tape that no one has commented on that's just as damning. Do you know what the second part of the tape he said?
Tell me.
He was married. I believe at the time his wife may even have been pregnant, but whatever. He talked about chasing a married woman while he was married because he wanted to screw her. No one talked about that part of it.
Don't say screw her. That's
what should I say?
sleep with her. I don't know.
No, it wasn't. He didn't want to sleep with her. That's too
Screw her.
That's too much of a euphemism. With Trump, it is screw.
Oh God.
As much as I hate to use that word, it's the only appropriate word for Donald Trump.
Okay.
He doesn't sleep with women, Sam. You know that from the testimony of Stormy Daniels.
When I start hearing Trump sex talk, I
know. It's pretty horrific, but we have to talk about it because this is the most powerful person in the world.
Crazy.
Hard to believe.
A weird note to end on, but that is Lichtman Live for this evening. A quick shout out to JCKCPA and 80 Mart for your donations. Dad, what are your final words? Oh, the good news is the Lichtman Live post show is coming up right after this on my channel. So stay tuned for that if you want to keep hanging out.
Well,
Dad, let me finish the...
Oh, I thought you were done.
What are your final words to the people?
We have good news and bad news. Obviously, the bad news is all the horrific things that Trump and his allies are doing that just break the mold of our democracy. On the other hand, the good news is the American people are turning against him and turning against him decisively, even before the recent horrors have been made public. So, what do the British say? Keep a stiff upper lip. And as Jesse Jackson always said, my old buddy, keep hope alive.
Everybody's your old buddy.
Jesse and I we go way back. We actually wrote an op-ed together back in the day.
Okay. You, Jesse Jackson, Pat Buchanan, you're all just besties.
Yeah.
Merrick Garland.
What can I tell you?
Okay.
George McGovern.
Who else?
Lots of people. Ray Mabus.
I don't know who that is.
Secretary of the Navy, former governor of Mississippi, the last liberal governor of the state of Mississippi. Congressman Jim McGovern, my former student.
All right, that wasn't our green light.
Enough name dropping.
Right.
I don't normally name drop.
No, you don't. But you always say XYZ is your best friend.
My old buddy, yeah. Your mom gives me a hard time about that.
Right, all these old buddies that my mom and we've never met, so,
Well, that's why I call them old buddies.
Ah, okay.
All right.
That is true. All right. Say goodnight, Dad. The Lichtman Live post show comes up in a few minutes.
Good night. Stay on for the post show. Thank you for watching and listening. And thanks for the great questions.